What separates a model that's an absolute slog to paint from one that's fun all the way to the end? What makes a model perfect? In today's video, I'm going to break down what I think are the two most important aspects of a model's design, but because this is subjective, I'm also going to interview a sculptor and a mold maker and caster to get a wider perspective on this question. The first feature that we're going to look at is paintability. Because we're painting miniatures, everything on the model is quite small.
Well, yeah. Well, duh, yeah.
I know it seems obvious, but basically when it comes to the whole medium of miniatures, you need to exaggerate. You can't simply use the proportions of a human being when sculpting a humanoid character at scale, especially when the model is on the smaller side. The character's fingers, eyes, and other finer details would be unpaintable for most people. And I know that because that's how I made my first gaming models. When I sent them off for testing, the resounding feedback was, "Is this mini for ants?" The majority of models that people paint are around 30 millimeter in height, and they need to stay that size. Because increasing in height isn't an option, the other option is to increase the size of the smaller details. This is often referred to as heroic scale, and the execution of it varies. A poorly sculpted heroic scale model might have bowling balls for hands and look like a midget, and a great model will be subtle yet help the artist paint those smaller details. It really is a fine line that sculptors have to toe. After you get the proportions right, the next detail to consider is the pose. Sometimes various parts of a model will block access to other parts, and while painting a miniature in pieces is a solution, it's one that I'd rarely turn to if I didn't have to. Sometimes a pose like that can also make all the lovely sculpted detail and thus the paint job harder to see and appreciate as well, making it feel like your efforts are somewhat wasted. More importantly, you want the pose to evoke the feeling of the character. If you're painting a holy armored knight, you might want the pose to be epic and mighty. Or if it's a thief, maybe they're sneaking around. It's as if the model is posing for a picture that'll go on the front cover of a magazine. Remember, we're exaggerating literally by enlarging the details that are hard to paint, but also aesthetically with the model's body language and design. Real quick aside, I'm showing miniatures right now in a critical light, but the models that I'm showing aren't unpaintable or bad. They're just losing in one or more categories that I imagined in a race that's not exactly measurable. Even my own models have problems. I think the Duchess has a lot of needless detail on it, especially around the waist. And I think my 32 millimeter Wood Elf models aren't the easiest to paint when it comes to things like the hands and the face. I think it's incredibly difficult to nail all the categories that I'm going to be sharing in today's video, especially in one model. And I want to be super careful with my wording when it comes to criticizing other people's artistic efforts. Okay, back to the video.
My name's Louis Downs. I'm the managing director of a company called CMA Creative Solutions. When you asked me this question, I thought it was quite interesting. What makes a model perfect? Firstly, personally, a model that evokes character and is sculpted well, is well proportioned, and really tells a story. So not just is a figure, but gives us some reference to them as to how they got to where they are now.
It's important to mention at this stage that a lot of these best practices are at odds with each other. You might want to pose for a model that makes it harder to paint, and that's going to be a common theme that runs throughout this entire video, and we'll address it a little bit later on.
My name is Leila. Okay, so I'll be serious. No, I can't. I am a digital sculptor with almost 6 years of experience in digital sculpting. A lot of factors actually are important for reaching to a perfect model. I think we need it in the industry because we are like used to see the same model all the time. Perfect can be different, but still perfect. We don't need another pretty girl, another pretty body in the, like, for example, if we are talking about the character.
Speaking of perfect models, let me introduce this video's sponsor, Hey Gears, and their Ultracraft Reflex RS, which you've been seeing models printed from all throughout this video. Hey Gears sent me their newest printer along with their washing and curing station, and I was immediately blown away by how integrated and professional the whole setup felt. The printer feeds itself through a resin holster in the back. The RS includes an optional vat that warms itself, and the machine calculates the tension on the FEP to identify when the current layer you're printing has unstuck itself, which translates to faster printing because you're not guessing what the release time is. It's automatically determined. The printer even identifies for you when there are little bits of cured resin left in the vat or any other foreign material. And that's kind of the story of my whole experience with this system so far. 3D printing for me has always been something that I want to be more plug and play, but to get really amazing results, which I also want because I'm a try-hard, it sometimes feels like you need a ton of experience and research to get every ounce of performance out of your machine. With this system, however, more time can be spent on the craft that 3D printing is supporting and less on wrestling with machine's settings. Let me share a story with you. For my Age of Sigmar army, I replaced my unit of Graveguard with a 3D printed replacement, which had supports that weren't great. Not only because they failed to print numerous times, but because they damaged the model when you removed them. This unfortunate situation led to me spending countless hours placing my own supports on each of the 10 models and their separate 2 weapons. With that exact model and Hagear's auto support feature and a bit of fine tuning to make the support connections smaller, I got a perfect print on the first try, and it took me as long as the program takes to place supports. You can even remove supports on models that have them baked in with the software super cleanly. This model is the only model that failed to print on this printer so far, so I removed them, used the same auto support feature, and it printed just fine. Speaking of the slicer, the software features one-click slicing, which not only repairs, but also orientates, supports, and places the model on the build plate, and finally slices it all in one button for people who want a more seamless experience. Right now, there's an April discount going on, which makes the Reflex and the Reflex RS cheaper. There are also bundle prices with the curing and washing station. All of these discounts can be combined with my $50 off coupon code you can find down in the description below. If you want the best plug-and-play solution for 3D printing that I've personally experienced, this seems like a great option and time to get in, and has been servicing me well so far. All right, back to discussing what makes a perfect miniature. To summarize so far, a great model has small yet paintable features and a great pose that doesn't block too much of the rest of the model and supports the design of the character. These are very literal interpretations of making a model more paintable, but let's get a little bit less literal. A great sculpt for a model is effective, but what do I mean by that? Basically, the model maximizes all the elements of a character that you're excited to paint and minimizes everything else. If I'm excited to paint a Space Marine, that likely means that I'm excited to paint a bunch of power armor, a weapon or two, a custom detail that represents the chapter, and maybe an exposed face. Anything added onto that can often feel like a chore, such as endless accessories hooked to their thighs, forearms, and waist. Oftentimes, a sculptor can get a little carried away with a model, filling up most of the available surface area with extra details, and admittedly, it makes models look a lot more impressive. If the art form was simply looking at digital renders of an STL, I wouldn't be able to fault them. But the reality of our medium is that another artist still has to put their impression on the model. And if a mini is feeling cluttered, it can cause 3 issues for a painter. 1, it can feel like a lot of the creative choices have been made for me. As someone who enjoys painting, I like to have some agency over the final outcome of a model. An example of this is when a sculptor adds fur texture to a piece of fabric that could have otherwise been just flat, which would allow me to pick what the fabric is, whether it's fur, silk, denim, or cloth. However, some painters want models to have lots of sculpted detail because that detail accepts products like express paint, speed paint, and contrast paint really well, which is why my wording was generic earlier. The model should maximize what you want to paint. It's important when finding a great model for you to enjoy that you understand your approach to the hobby and where you find your fun. 2, if your mini has belts on belts on belts, it breaks up the large surface area, which can often be really enjoyable to paint, and instead reduces the entire model painting experience to only tiny little spots. You ideally want a good mixture of small details and also some larger areas to blend and show vivid color transitions, etc. Lastly, 3, it makes the paint job take longer. No matter what your painting approach is, whether it's traditional or the aforementioned products, if there's more stuff on the Mini to paint, it's going to take longer. And when that stuff is not something you anticipated, it just feels like a chore. One thing that I'm glossing over when it comes to defining what makes a perfect model is preference. I'm going to prefer a fantasy or a sci-fi subject to a historical one.
I should like the concept. If I don't like the concept, then it's just like, I don't know, factory work. I just want to sculpt. I just want to sculpt and finish it fast.
However, I still think it's important to mention stuff like this because larger figures, whether larger in scale or just bigger monsters and robots in smaller scale worlds, take many hours to paint, and you want to enjoy those many hours.
The other thing that I think is very important to push the model to the perfection is that I don't deliver models fast. Like I finished it now. I decide to take like 2 days or even a week or 2 weeks to close the model before delivering and reopen again after a few days or 1 week even to see what is left there.
That wraps up the first section of how a model is or isn't paintable. But the other huge aspect of a great model is the manufacturing. What's shorthand for manufacturer? That's its production, just in case on the off chance you can't read it. You definitely can't read it. A great model has clearly defined details that after a few layers of paint are still visible. This means that the depth of certain features needs to be exaggerated in anticipation of paint filling them up. I was painting the Grand Inquisitor for my Shatterpoint squad, and after working on the blends on his face, I had all but eliminated the markings, leaving me to basically guess where to paint. This is important because a strategy that many painters often rely on is the model itself lightly guiding the very tip of our brush. And if there is no physical edge to reference, then we gotta do it live. A great model also has clearly defined details, which often comes down to the cast, whether it's resin, pewter, plastic, or other materials. You want everything to be nice and sharp, but not too sharp. When two edges meet, you want a very slight round over. The round over can often help to make painting easier. That's kind of a nuanced point, so let me break it down a little bit. If the edge of a detail is super sharp, the line I can put on that edge is only ever going to be one thickness. If there's a very slight round over, I can vary the thickness I put on the edge by adjusting the amount of pressure I put on the model with my brush. The more I push, the thicker the line will be. A great model is cut into pieces that make sense. For instance, a head that is separated at the neck so that you can swap in a new one or paint the head separately from the body. Or if a model is huge and cumbersome to hold in the hand when fully assembled, having separate parts makes sense so you can paint them individually and not have to stretch your hand and fingers awkwardly or paint with an unsupported hand.
Professionally, a model that is beautifully sculpted whilst also being sympathetically created and cut for both mold making and, more importantly, customers. So the end user or maker, so it goes together with joy and sits on the table beautifully at the end.
Those pieces should also be large enough to be held in the hand comfortably and not be super tiny like the bangs of a miniature's hair. Also, while we're on the subject of user experience, the less pieces there are to assemble, the better.
If they're playing, often they want less pieces because there's less assembly. People want to generally put it together quicker.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that the head's connected to the body because they're going to do it all together anyway. On the painting side, you know, if they can and there's a different texture between the head and the body, then take the head off, please. Yes, please. Thank you very much. Especially if there's hair going in lots of directions and all sorts of things like that.
Of course, more complicated models require more parts to be manufactured, but cutting a model up for casting is as much a science as it is an art form. This means that some companies do it well and other companies do it less well. Sometimes you'll find models with mold lines that run straight through a character's face, which is obviously not good. Engineers go through many revisions of a sprue and mold layout until they get the material flowing and filling all the cavities of the mold and to have the individual parts be cleanly cast. A great model is made out of a material that can be cleaned up, which is especially important if there are mold lines on someone's face. Resin and pewter are great because they can be sanded and cut with ease, but not all plastic is made equal. Some plastic, like that found in most board game miniatures, tends to get fuzzy and doesn't separate from the model well. This makes it hard to remove defects on the model that come from manufacturing, which is unideal because most models need some kind of cleanup. I've never had a model that is totally perfect and doesn't need any kind of adjustment. Additionally, plastic like this doesn't have the greatest detail retention, which is only really a problem if the model makers don't account for that. I have painted beautiful, large, resin cast display models, but also equally as beautiful board game models that are made out of a less ideal material. But they're both great painting experiences because they both understood what the material and manufacturing process required of the design.
The sculptors who are best at delivering the best customer experience at the end often weave that backwards to their design from the start. And that's amazing.
A designer may have an idea for an extremely cool character, but that may lead to 20 individual parts where one of them is a super thin sword that curls if resin is used, or a model that has lots of detail like chainmail but is cast in a soft and goopy plastic. A great designer needs to understand the full pipeline of model creation so they can make appropriate choices. When I was vetting companies to manufacture my first model, the Duchess, the first quote that I got had cut the model into so many pieces because they were being completely faithful to the original sculpt. My second quote from a company who adjusted the model just a little bit slightly reduced that part count by over half and lost very little of the creative vision of the model. Ultimately, a great model is a massive balancing act. You want to capture the artistic vision of the designer while considering the material and method it's manufactured in and the end user who's going to assemble and paint it. That's it for this video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed an entire video that's a overly verbose chalkboard sequence. If you want to learn more about how models are made, I walked through a whole resin casting factory to look over the entire process. I've also spoken about my experience in model making in detail. I'll link both those videos at the end of this one and also in the description below. If you like this channel and you want to support it, a great way to do that is checking out all my stuff on my web store, miniac.co, like my models, but also my hobby tools. Checking me out on Patreon, getting access to behind the scenes information over there, and my Discord server, picking up materials that I recommend using my Amazon affiliate links, all things linked down in the description below. Subscribe today! And most importantly, don't forget to paint my Miniac!